Why would anyone choose to live in a home filled with darkness, thick smoke, and the constant smell of fire, especially when clearer air and brighter spaces seem so much more comfortable? In the far north of medieval Europe, where winter ruled more than half the year, comfort was not defined by light or cleanliness, but by survival. To modern eyes, a Viking home appears harsh and almost unlivable. Low ceilings pressed down over earthen floors. Walls of turf and timber swallowed daylight. Smoke drifted freely through the room, stinging eyes and blackening beams. And yet, these homes were not primitive mistakes. They were carefully evolved systems, shaped by centuries of trial, failure, and adaptation to one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth. Every shadow, every curl of smoke served a purpose. Winter in Scandinavia was not simply cold, it was relentless. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, storms battered the coasts, and snow buried the land for months. Firewood was precious, daylight was scarce, and exposure could kill in hours. In this world, a bright, airy home was a liability. Open spaces lost heat too quickly. High ceilings trapped warmth far above where people lived. Large windows invited icy winds and bled precious heat into the darkness outside. The Viking solution was the opposite of what modern instinct suggests. They built homes that clung to heat, absorbed warmth, and refused to let it escape. The darkness inside Viking houses was not accidental. Windows, when they existed at all, were small and often covered with animal hide, horn, or thin oiled cloth. Glass was rare and valuable. Every opening was a potential leak, a place where cold air could creep in and warmth could vanish. By limiting light, Vikings limited heat loss. The interior remained dim even at midday, but the temperature stayed more stable. In winter survival, consistency mattered more than comfort. A steady, survivable warmth could mean the difference between life and death. Smoke, too, was an ally rather than an enemy. Viking homes rarely had chimneys in the way we understand them today. Instead, fires burned in open hearths at the center of the living space, and smoke slowly filled the room before escaping through roof vents, gaps in the thatch, or the door itself. To modern lungs, this seems unbearable, but smoke carried hidden benefits. It helped preserve the wooden structure, coating beams and rafters with soot that repelled insects and slowed rot. In an age without chemical preservatives, smoke extended the life of the house itself. More importantly, smoke was heat in motion. As it rose and spread, it warmed the entire interior, not just the area around the fire. The thick air trapped warmth near the ceiling, creating a heat reservoir that slowly radiated downward. In a low-roofed house, this meant the living space stayed warmer for longer, even after the fire burned low. At night, when flames were reduced to embers, the smoky warmth lingered, wrapping the household in a protective cocoon. The structure of Viking homes amplified this effect. Longhouses were built long and narrow, with thick walls made of turf, stone, and wood. Turf, cut from the earth itself, was an extraordinary insulator. Layered densely against wooden frames, it blocked wind, absorbed moisture, and stored heat like a natural battery. Once warmed, these walls released heat slowly, smoothing out the brutal swings between day and night temperatures. Darkness inside the house was partly a result of these massive walls, but it was also proof of their effectiveness. Inside, life revolved around the hearth. This was not just a fireplace, it was the heart of the home. Cooking, heating, light, and social life all centered on this single source of energy. The fire was rarely allowed to go out completely in winter. Even a small bed of embers could be coaxed back into flame, saving precious fuel. The constant presence of smoke meant the fire was always working, always contributing to the thermal balance of the house. Vikings understood something modern architecture often forgets. Heat rises, but it can also be stored. The smoke-blackened ceiling beams absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly at night. Animal hides, wooden benches, and stored supplies added thermal mass, holding onto heat rather than reflecting it away. Even people themselves were part of the system. Families slept together, often on raised platforms along the walls, sharing body heat and staying above the coldest air near the floor. Darkness also shaped daily rhythms. Without bright interiors, Viking life followed the natural cycle of fire and daylight. Activity clustered around the hearth, conserving energy and fuel. Long winter nights were spent close together, repairing tools, telling stories, and maintaining equipment. The house encouraged stillness, cooperation, and efficiency. Every unnecessary movement meant more heat lost, more fuel burned. The environment itself taught discipline. Smoke played another crucial role: preservation. Meat and fish were often hung from rafters, slowly drying and smoking above the hearth. This transformed the home into a living storage facility. Food lasted longer, resisted bacteria, and remained edible deep into winter when hunting was dangerous or impossible. The smoky air that irritated the eyes also protected the household from starvation. The house was not just shelter, it was a survival machine. Health risks did exist. Long-term smoke exposure likely caused respiratory issues, and eye irritation was common. But these were acceptable costs in a world where freezing to death or starving were far more immediate threats. Vikings optimized for survival first, comfort second. Their homes reflect this harsh calculus. What looks miserable to modern viewers was, in reality, a finely tuned response to environmental pressure. Even the darkness had psychological effects. Bright open spaces can feel uplifting, but they also encourage activity and movement. In winter, that meant wasted energy. A dim interior encouraged rest, focus, and conservation. It created a sense of enclosure, of being held by the house itself. In storms that howled outside and nights that stretched endlessly, this sense of containment mattered. The home became a refuge, not just from cold, but from the overwhelming power of the environment. Archaeological evidence supports this picture. Excavated longhouses show thick soot layers on beams, minimal window openings, and hearths placed to maximize heat distribution. These were not accidental features. They were repeated across regions and generations, refined through experience. When a design failed, people froze, starved, or abandoned it. What survived was what worked. To live in a Viking home was to accept darkness and smoke as companions. But in return, those companions offered warmth, preservation, and life itself. The house did not fight the environment, it negotiated with it. It trapped heat rather than chasing it. It used smoke rather than banishing it. It embraced darkness as insulation. In doing so, it allowed families to endure winters that would otherwise have been impossible. By modern standards, Viking homes seem brutal. But judged by the standards of survival, they were masterpieces. In a world without central heating, glass windows, or modern insulation, Vikings built environments that turned the very things we avoid, smoke, darkness, enclosure, into tools of survival. And as winter closed in, as storms battered the land and daylight vanished, those dark, smoky rooms became some of the safest places a human being could be. By the time winter tightened its grip on the Scandinavian world, the Viking home had already begun its quiet work. What seemed chaotic from the outside, the drifting smoke, the dim interior, the heavy smell of soot, was in fact a carefully balanced system. Each element interacted with the others, creating an environment that resisted cold not through force, but through patience. Heat was not produced in bursts and wasted into the night air. It was absorbed, stored, and released slowly, hour after hour, day after day. The low ceilings that made Viking houses feel oppressive by modern standards were one of their greatest strengths. Warm air rises, and in a tall room it escapes upward, collecting uselessly near the roof. Viking builders understood this instinctively. By keeping ceilings low, they ensured that warmth stayed within reach. Smoke and heat pooled just above head height, forming a warm layer that insulated the space below. This trapped warmth reduced the need for constant fuel and allowed the fire to burn smaller and longer rather than hotter and shorter. The walls played an equally vital role. Turf walls were often more than a meter thick, built from layers of earth, grass, and roots cut directly from the land. These walls were not dead structures. They breathed slowly, absorbing moisture and releasing it over time. In winter, they acted as thermal shields, blocking icy winds and preventing rapid temperature changes. Once heated, turf retained warmth far better than stone alone. Even when fires died down overnight, the walls continued to radiate stored heat back into the room. Darkness inside the home also helped regulate temperature. Sunlight, when it did enter, was diffuse rather than direct, preventing sharp contrasts between warm and cold zones. The interior remained thermally even. Sudden heat loss was avoided. The house existed in a state of controlled equilibrium, resisting extremes. This was crucial in an era when restarting a fire from scratch could cost valuable time and energy. Smoke, drifting lazily through the interior, created a layer of insulation of its own. The particles suspended in the air slowed convection, reducing the movement of warm air out of the house. This phenomenon, while not understood scientifically at the time, was experienced practically. Homes with a constant presence of smoke stayed warmer longer. The air itself became part of the insulating system, thickening the boundary between the hearth and the cold world outside. The placement of the hearth was never random. Positioned along the central axis of the longhouse, it ensured that heat radiated evenly to both sides. Sleeping platforms were arranged along the walls, where rising warmth would reach them naturally. These raised areas lifted sleepers away from the cold ground, which acted as a heat sink. Beneath the packed earth floors, frost could linger even when the air above was warm. Elevation mattered, and Vikings built their living spaces accordingly. Daily life followed the rhythms imposed by this environment. In winter, tasks were performed close to the hearth whenever possible. Tool repair, textile work, food preparation, and storytelling all happened within the warm core of the house. Movement to colder areas was minimized. The architecture itself guided behavior, encouraging efficiency and cooperation. The house was not just a container for life. It shaped how life was lived. Animals were often brought into close proximity with humans during the harshest months. In some longhouses, livestock occupied one end of the structure, separated by partitions, but sharing the same roof. Their body heat added to the overall warmth of the building. Their presence also reduced the need to venture outside in blizzards to tend to them. This arrangement deepened the smoky, dark atmosphere but strengthened the thermal system. Human and animal survival became interlinked within the same enclosed space. The smoky interior also served as a defensive measure against pests and parasites. Fleas, lice, and insects struggled to survive in the constant haze. Stored grain, textiles, and food supplies benefited from this protection. The smell of smoke permeated everything, but it was a small price to pay for reduced infestation and spoilage. In winter, when resources were limited and illness could spread quickly, these subtle protections mattered greatly. Fuel efficiency was a constant concern. Firewood had to be cut, dried, and stored well before winter arrived. Overconsumption could mean running out before spring. Viking homes were designed to stretch every log as far as possible. The slow-burning fires, insulated walls, and heat-retaining interiors meant that less fuel produced more usable warmth. Smoke was evidence not of waste, but of careful control. Lighting was minimal by necessity. Oil lamps and tallow candles supplemented the hearth, but their light was soft and limited. This kept activity focused and deliberate. Darkness discouraged unnecessary work and conserved both fuel and energy. It also reduced airflow, as fewer openings were needed for ventilation. Every design choice reinforced the same goal: keep warmth in, keep cold out. Over time, these environments shaped Viking physiology and culture. People adapted to low light levels and smoky air. Their senses adjusted, their routines evolved. Children grew up within these conditions, learning instinctively where to sit, where to sleep, and how to move to stay warm. Knowledge was passed down not through theory, but through daily practice. The house itself was a teacher. Archaeological remains reveal repeated patterns across centuries. Burn marks on hearthstones, soot layers on beams, worn sleeping platforms along walls, all speak to a consistent way of life. These were not temporary shelters or experimental designs. They were the result of generations refining a system that worked. When Viking settlers moved to new lands, Greenland, Iceland, the North Atlantic islands, they carried these principles with them, adapting materials but preserving the core logic. The darkness and smoke that dominate modern imagination were not signs of ignorance. They were signs of restraint. Vikings did not attempt to overpower their environment with massive fires or open spaces. They learned to live within its limits, using subtle adjustments and accumulated knowledge. Their homes were quiet machines, operating continuously, rarely noticed until they failed. In extreme cold, survival favors systems that are forgiving. A Viking home could withstand a missed day of fire tending, a sudden storm, or a shortage of fuel. Its stored heat, insulated walls, and enclosed design provided a buffer against disaster. This resilience was its greatest strength. In a world of uncertainty, the house offered stability. As winter stretched on and daylight dwindled to a few pale hours, these homes became worlds unto themselves. Inside the smoke-darkened walls, life continued with a rhythm set by fire and necessity. The darkness protected warmth. The smoke preserved food, materials, and structure. Together, they formed an environment that allowed Viking families to endure conditions that would otherwise have been lethal. What appears uncomfortable today was, in its time, deeply practical. Viking homes were not built to impress or to please the eye. They were built to last through winter, through hunger, through isolation. Every beam, every wall, every curl of smoke contributed to a single purpose: keeping life alive when the outside world turned hostile. As winter loosened its grip and the first signs of thaw appeared, the Viking home revealed another layer of its quiet intelligence. These structures were not only designed to endure the coldest months, but to transition smoothly between seasons without collapse or decay. The same smoke that blackened beams in winter dried out moisture in spring. The darkness that conserved heat during long nights reduced structural stress as temperatures shifted. What looked crude was, in reality, remarkably adaptable. When spring arrived, the accumulated soot within the house served as a protective coating. Wooden beams impregnated with smoke residue resisted mold and rot caused by melting snow and rising humidity. In coastal regions, where salty air accelerated decay, this protection was especially valuable. Homes that lacked constant smoke exposure deteriorated faster, requiring frequent repairs or abandonment. The smoky interior, unpleasant to breathe, quietly preserved the skeleton of the house year after year. The earthen components of Viking homes also benefited from this seasonal cycle. Turf walls absorbed moisture during warmer months and slowly released it as temperatures dropped. This prevented rapid freezing and cracking, a common problem in stone-only structures. Darkness limited direct sunlight on interior surfaces, reducing thermal shock. The house aged gradually rather than violently, a critical factor in regions where rebuilding consumed enormous labor. These homes also supported social stability. During winter, families and extended kin groups spent months in close proximity. The enclosed, dim environment encouraged shared routines and collective responsibility. Conflict in such conditions could be dangerous, threatening cooperation when it was needed most. The architecture itself discouraged isolation and promoted communal life. Everyone depended on the fire, the stored food, and the shared warmth. Survival was a group effort reinforced by the physical space. The smoky darkness shaped storytelling, memory, and tradition. In the glow of the hearth, voices carried further than light. Oral histories, myths, and practical knowledge were passed down during long evenings when outdoor work was impossible. The house became a vessel for culture as much as shelter. Darkness focused attention inward, on words and shared experience rather than external distraction. In this way, the environment helped preserve identity across generations. Viking homes were also forgiving of human error. A sudden storm, an injury, or illness could prevent proper maintenance for days. The thermal mass of walls and stored heat in beams provided a margin of safety. Even neglected fires left behind warmth that lingered. This tolerance was vital in a world where unpredictability was constant and help was often far away. As settlements grew, these principles scaled naturally. Larger longhouses maintained the same logic. Central hearths, thick walls, limited openings, controlled smoke. Even when decorative elements increased for chieftains or wealthy families, the core survival design remained unchanged. Status did not override practicality. No matter how powerful a Viking leader became, winter obeyed no hierarchy. When Vikings traveled or settled abroad, they adapted their designs to new environments without abandoning fundamental concepts. In Iceland, where timber was scarce, turf construction dominated. In Greenland, homes were built partially into the earth, increasing insulation. Darkness deepened, smoke thickened, and ceilings lowered further. Each adjustment was guided by the same understanding: light and air are luxuries, warmth is survival. The endurance of these homes left a lasting archaeological footprint. Ruins of turf walls still mark the landscape centuries later, their outlines visible beneath grass and soil. These remnants testify to how well the designs harmonized with their environment. Rather than resisting the land, Viking builders worked with it, borrowing earth and returning it when structures finally collapsed. Modern interpretations often misunderstand this harmony. Smoke-free, brightly lit spaces are associated with health and progress today, but these values arise from abundant energy and advanced materials. Vikings lived under severe constraints. Their solutions reflect a different optimization, one that prioritized resilience over comfort, continuity over convenience. Judged within that context, their homes were astonishingly effective. The lessons embedded in these structures remain relevant. In an age facing energy scarcity and climate instability, the Viking approach offers insight. Passive heating, thermal mass, minimal openings, and multifunctional spaces are principles rediscovered in modern sustainable architecture. Darkness is no longer feared, but reconsidered as a tool for reducing energy use. Smoke is replaced with controlled airflow and insulation, but the logic remains strikingly similar. The smoky darkness of Viking homes was not an aesthetic choice, but an ethical one. It reflected a worldview that accepted limits and worked within them. Fire was respected, not abused. Resources were stretched, not wasted. The house taught its occupants patience, cooperation, and awareness of their environment. These values were reinforced daily by the space itself. As winter returned each year, the home welcomed its inhabitants back into its protective gloom. The first fire lit in autumn marked a transition, not just in season, but in mindset. Life turned inward. The outside world grew hostile, but inside, warmth slowly spread through walls, beams, and bodies. Smoke curled upward, darkening the ceiling a little more, strengthening the house for the months ahead. In this way, Viking homes became living archives of survival. Each layer of soot told a story of winters endured. Each worn beam bore the memory of countless fires. The darkness held echoes of laughter, argument, grief, and resilience. These spaces witnessed births and deaths, feasts and famines, all under the same low roof. What endures is not the discomfort, but the ingenuity. Vikings did not merely survive winter. They designed environments that made survival routine. Their homes were not temporary refuges, but long-term systems refined across generations. Smoke and darkness were tools, not failures. Together, they formed a quiet technology, one that allowed human life to persist at the edge of what was possible. By understanding these homes on their own terms, the image of the Viking world changes. It becomes less about brutality and more about adaptation, less about conquest and more about endurance. The dark, smoky house stands as a testament to human creativity under pressure, a reminder that survival often depends not on conquering nature, but on learning to live within it.